Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at MS Dynamics World. On this episode, I am joined by Michelle Frennier and Chris Winstanley of NMB Solutions to discuss supply chain trends they are watching in 2025. NMB is the sponsor of this episode, and we begin by discussing some of the ways that Dynamics 365 finance and supply chain management users will be forced to think about global challenges this year. Shipping cost management will demand particular attention, Chris tells us, and we discuss some of the technical capabilities that can address it. Global trade compliance is another area of continued uncertainty, and Michelle helps break down some of the key risks and challenges. We also discuss data visibility concerns, the latest in supply chain automation opportunities, and some of the solutions that NMB is bringing to bear to help teams improve compliance, shipping, and transportation. All right. Well, Chris, Michelle, welcome back to the podcast. It's always great to chat with both of you. Maybe for our listeners who haven't met you before or heard you speak, we could do a bit of an introduction. Chris, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Jason. I'm Chris Winstanley. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at NMB Solutions, which really means that I look after the sales and the solution consulting side of the business.
All right, great. And Michelle, welcome.
Hi, yes, I'm Michelle Frennier. I'm the strategic consultant for global trade with NMB, and I'm a 20-year veteran in trade compliance and happen to have a extreme passion for automation in that space. So I'm glad to be here and talk with you today.
It's always really nice to get perspective from both of you. I know you've seen so many things in the space, so I want to jump right into it. We're really focused on supply chain challenges and supply chain trends here today. Chris, why don't I start with you? Can you give us some of the supply chain challenges that you see companies trying to face and use D365 to face in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the supply chain challenges are the same for everyone, regardless of whether they use D365 or another ERP. The challenges are the same. It's the solution and the way they face them that might be different. But it's clear, I think, to all of us that the kind of shifts in the geopolitical policies or the geopolitical landscape at the minute and the impact that will have on trade, the availability and the cost of raw materials and finished goods, for example, is going to have quite a significant impact on all businesses' supply chain, where businesses perhaps thought they could, either source goods from or sell goods to, might suddenly change very quickly given the geopolitical landscape shifting as well. We saw what happened with the Suez Canal. We saw what happened with when the Ukraine-Russian war started. And now, if there's anything that's certain, it's that things are even more uncertain, to be honest. And I think that just leads to real issues and challenges for businesses, in terms of managing their inventory, understanding kind of where the demand's going to be, dealing with supply chain bottlenecks or shortages. I think all of those things are going to come into play. And if you add that to the fact that we learned last year that around half of industry leaders think that faster deliveries to their customers is one of their biggest competitive concerns for 2024, no doubt that also kind of bleeds into 2025. If you take everything I just said and then try and add faster deliveries in kind of speech marks to that, when you're having to manage that process and maybe putting it alongside, labor shortages, rising costs for, operationally and for transportation and shipping, and maybe dealing with, some slower or inefficient order fulfillment things going on in the warehouse. I think, if you take that in the round, to me, that's probably the greatest challenges that we'll be talking about in 2025. Michelle, I think you've probably got, some views on that purely from the compliance side as well.
Yeah, sure. Of course, my job is sexy again because everyone's looking at trade compliance, right? Before, I'd be the one who nobody wanted to talk to. Now they're like, how about those tariffs? It's been kind of interesting. But yeah, you bring up good points. And I would say that one of the challenges that is really facing everyone in trade and everyone who imports or exports is that lack of visibility and specifically lack of embedded compliance. So if you don't have eyes on it, you can't see it. You can't fix it and you can't plan for it. So it really prevents companies from being nimble. And I feel that that's really where focusing on solutions that bring everything into your ERP systems is really going to be where it sets everyone apart. Those are going to be the people who can make things happen when stuff is uncertain.
Yeah, I think visibility is going to be a theme that runs through this whole conversation, Jason, to be honest.
So visibility into compliance, visibility into managing costs,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps. And that was the next thing I did want to talk to you about was cost, managing shipping costs in particular. How do businesses mitigate that as costs go up?
Yeah, and I think that's where tools and technology that are available to businesses using D365 and ISV solutions such as NMBs, that's where those two things can really help. And I think there's two key things that can work together to enable a business to mitigate costs, and that's access to the right data and then the ability to use that data effectively to streamline, optimize, reduce costs, etc. In my world, I see them as falling into two buckets. So you have kind of the operational costs, what the whole full cycle from an order to delivery, but then also the specific carrier costs. What are you paying to your carriers to do that final delivery to your customer? Some of those things in terms of then what you can do to mitigate those costs falls under automation. And we're going to talk a little bit more about automation in a few minutes. But the other part of that, in terms of what it actually costs you through your carriers and how you can mitigate that, really comes down to ability to access those rates, the carrier rates in real time, be able to shop across your multiple different carriers and your services, and the ability to switch quickly, understanding what the cost of shipping is to different locations across North America and kind of the wider world, and meeting your customer demands. When we saw in Canada very recently, kind of the strikes with Canada Post, and if a business wasn't able to quickly pivot and use and work with another carrier in an automated way, then very quickly, the costs started to, their customers became very unhappy, but also costs start to spiral out of control. And having visibility, again, there's that key word I think that we're going to hear so many times of kind of the status of where the shipments are, and the also understanding what your actual costs are and having visibility and access to your actual costs versus your expected costs, and a way of managing those, and maybe using those to work with different carriers and look at your carrier costs and maybe select different carriers and work with them on the contract side. Using that information is an area where you can really start to manage that process and keep those costs under control. And Michelle, I don't know if you had anything to add on your side.
I think one of the pieces that comes into shipping that also touches the area that I mainly work on is the cost that you pay your forwarder for international shipping. So some of the stuff just seems to be, that's just a cost of doing business. That's just what's charged for that. One in particular is export filing fees. If your forwarder or courier company is doing that for you, those charges can be more than $50 sometimes, actually most times. And that's them filing your data on your behalf, and you have no control over it. So there's a lot of efficiencies to be had with looking at automation and we're going to talk more about automation, but automating an AES filing from your source system as opposed to passing data to a carrier where they're going to then upcharge you by $50 or more, and really making it so it's actually more difficult for you to audit and do your compliance work because you don't have any access to correct or make changes or delete or replace any of those filings. You have to do it through that carrier. So yeah, those are some areas you can kind of hone in on your bills. Pay attention to those buckets. What are you paying total? And are there more efficient and more compliant ways that you could be handling that?
Yes, Michelle, let me give you another question here. So with the complexity of trade compliance, what are some of the risks? How are you advising companies on adapting?
Yeah, there's a lot of topics out there right now, specifically in the area of people who are arriving on the denied parties list. You'll hear them called an SDN list, so especially designated national or consolidated list. These are all areas where companies are starting to have to pay more attention because the government is placing the bad guys on the list and you're not allowed to do business with them. So one of those major risks are, does your system catch those? We've seen some pretty high profile cases where companies have used tech solutions to help screen companies and the tech has failed. They have not had the right checks and balances in place or parameter settings to match their business. They're using sort of an out of the box thing, not really tuning it up to what they need. And that's where kind of the risk comes in. If you don't have a streamlined system that is looking at each part of your transaction, you could have somebody that you've been doing business with forever who turns out is part owner in a company whose part owner is one of these denied parties. So having systems in place that allow you to catch that and treat your customer base and vendor base as sort of a living solution that you're always checking, that's a best practice that's going to help kind of take away some of those risks and allow you to stop the flow immediately within your ERP, which I feel is where these errors come in, is it goes undetected for a while and that becomes a systemic issue. So that's one area. Another area is just looking at managing compliance audits, managing things like your licenses for export. I mean, we talk a lot about export, but because that's where most of this energy is coming in, where they're trying to make sure we're not doing business as a country with places that we shouldn't be or enabling the bad guys, right? Chris talked about the war with Russia. That's a huge topic of making sure that we're not contributing as U.S. companies to that. One of the things that's recently come in the news, and it's sort of an unofficial official, is that there's news that the Commerce Department, for instance, who files or authorizes licenses for export, has put a sort of a temporary pause on approvals of new export licenses. If a company is not aware of what that has for an impact to their business every week, they could be saying, oh, I'm on a pause. Well, now what? Once that pause goes away, how are you managing those licenses that you need to file for your upcoming orders, or the ones that are in the queue that are sort of stalled as well? What systems are in place to make sure those aren't missed, that those get filed? Because they can have, typically 30 to 45 day turnaround time if you're lucky these days, too much more. And if you're thinking, man, I filed my license request 30, 60, 90 days ago, and now there's this pause that has really little definition to when it's going to resume itself. If your systems don't have a way of tracking that to your up-to-date orders, you have a lot of unhappy customers. It sort of plays into that whole supply chain nimbleness that Chris was talking about. If you don't know if you can't fix what you can't see, and we're seeing a lot of disruptive things at the levels of the government approvals where that's supposed to be really streamlined. And now it's another factor that we have to weigh in supply chain and compliance management.
Maybe just to put a bit of a finer point on it, if you think that you're, like for the D365 customers and perhaps partners listening here, if you think out of the box D365 will help manage these things for you and give you all that visibility that you need to be prepared for these kinds of challenges, it's probably not, right?
Yeah, there's definitely some ways that you can add to, right? With sort of NMB Solutions have areas that touch on the license management, touch on the embedded RPS screening. Those are all tools that you can bolt on with an ISV that allow you to really flex that system of record, right? D365 is where you're managing those nitpicky things that feed compliance. Your item, what its tariff number is, if it's got an export control number, what it ties to, what bills of materials it shows up in. That's all in the back of the house stuff in D365. It's how you're able to use the systems to track that through, to track your vendors' customers through the changing compliance landscape. That's really where it makes a difference.
All right. We've teased the automation topic a couple of times here, so I want to maybe dive into it. And Chris, let me put this one to you. Could you share any examples of workflows and automation that you're helping D365 customers with today?
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned earlier on that we couldn't really talk about improving or mitigating costs or improving kind of supply chain issues without automation. And now I'm going to say that it's tricky to talk about automation without dropping AI into the conversation at some point. But I'm going to try and leave that until we get a bit further into the overall discussion. But then when it comes to kind of what NMB is doing today to help D365 customers, there's a few things. First thing I'm going to mention, and I'll leave Michelle to maybe explain it in a bit more detail after I've finished, but everything that Michelle just talked about in terms of the restricted party screening, the denied party screening, and also when Michelle mentioned AES filing, one of the things that we've done is introduce those processes into D365 through our module and allow them to be part of the shipping process. So they run in an automated way as much as possible alongside the shipping process. So you're not having to kind of break or stop the shipping process in order to do those things. If there's a potential restricted party detected, we'll obviously alert and stop the process. Or if there's an AES filing to be done, then it can be done within the process. But what it's not doing is mean that you have to stop, move to another application, go to another person, or the alternative, which is to ignore that stuff and then make some mistakes along the way. But that aside, where NMB has traditionally found its niche within D365 and kind of supply chain and shipping generally is around the things that we talked about that are challenges right now for a number of businesses. One is providing the facility to do automated carrier and service selection. So understanding when a customer needs a particular product by, what the delivery date is, and being able to automatically select based on your carriers and services the most cost-effective one that's going to get it there in time. So not only are you keeping your customer satisfied, but you're also controlling your costs and not relying on a person to have to understand that and make that selection. And alongside that is the two things I would say. One is the generation, not just of labels, because everybody understands that in order to have a parcel shipping solution, you need the carrier labels. The other challenge is documentation. If you're shipping internationally or if you're shipping dangerous goods or hazardous goods, then there's a series of additional documents that need to go alongside that shipment. And one of the things that we've built into our workflows is the ability for those documents to print alongside or concurrently with the label. And more recently, we've introduced a track and trace module. So we talked a lot about visibility. And traditionally, although there's been, through parcel solutions, there's been connectivity to the carriers to maybe do some rating or book a shipment, print the label and so on. Quite often, then once the parcel has gone out of the door, the ability to go and see where it's up to, what's happened to it is let's go to the FedEx website. Let's go to the UPS website. Let's enter the tracking number. Let's follow the link and see what's happened. What we've done is actually automated that process where we're reaching out. We're using the carrier APIs to connect out to all of the different carriers and bring those statuses into D365. So through a central screen, through a kind of a single interface, a user can search by customer, by order number, by shipment number, by kind of multiple different parameters, but see all of the different statuses from all of the different shipments and parcels within one particular place. And it doesn't sound like revolutionary, but actually in terms of the time it saves, in terms of finding out what those are or dealing with customer queries in terms of where is my parcel, that does make a significant difference. So those are probably the ones that I would highlight from our side. Michelle, I don't know if you want to add a bit more color to the RPS and AES things that I mentioned.
Yeah, from an automation standpoint, we have a really unique solution. Most companies that are working with any ERP if they don't have a super fancy global trade management system that does only that, these sort of little nuggets of compliance don't actually connect back to ERPs in a smooth way where companies can access and employ users right in their native screens that they're used to. A lot of times it's a black box, something behind the scenes. People don't really know what's happening. All they know is something stuck, right? It's not as user friendly or intuitive that, this is what the system's doing for me. Here's how I make sure it's working correctly. So with the RPS solution and being able to screen and pull in data from known compliance partners who have all the screening lists, who have all the bells and whistles, who are integrating AI into that process on their side, we're actually able to bring in those best in breed compliance solutions directly into screens within D365 that the user can look at what's going on, action it from there. Automatic holds can be put on to make sure that the next transaction step that's coming up does not get authorized if you have a party, for instance, for a restricted party that comes up in the supply chain you're not expecting. So having that deeply embedded into the native D365 screens just makes it a lot less like witchcraft, I guess, for the people who don't do compliance. And then things like the AES filing, we talked about how much it costs to have a forwarder do that work for you. And you're just preparing that same data from your systems and then you're handing it off, you're getting a charge, and then you can't action anything. So by having an AES solution that's embedded in the actual order process and the pick process into the packing station and just be able to say, yep, it requires an AES filing or it has an exemption, for instance, either one of those, to have that really right within your order and seamless where all of the information leaves from D365, goes out to make its filing, and comes back and lists that ITN number, which is the authorization number for export, is going to print out on that packing label that Chris was talking about, but it's also going to be listed within the system. So in the case of audits or anything like this, having that system that just automatically automates this takes out the human error and the spots where you're like, oh man, customs called. What do I do now? You're not going to have that sort of panic. You're going to instead say, well, I have the ITN number that matches this order number, that matches these commodities, and here's what we filed, because it matches all the way back through that system of records. So automating these little things, being able to do that directly in the screens companies are used to and different users throughout the organization provides an increased efficiency. So it's a little bit more than automation, right? It's that peace of mind that everything's where it should be.
Yeah, excellent. I guess the next kind of logical thing that I would think of here that I know we wanted to talk about was reporting and analysis capabilities. And perhaps this is a good segue. I mean, what are D365 customers asking for today in the context of these kinds of scenarios when it comes to reporting on their activities and performance and analyzing them?
So it's back to that whole visibility thing, isn't it, here? So I was sort of smiling to myself as you were asking the question. So what kind of reporting and analysis capabilities are they asking for? Well, it's all around visibility of the things that we've talked about. So status information, cost management. So understanding their expected costs versus their actual costs. It's kind of those things that allow them to balance customer service with cost management. So real-time tracking and visibility, so being able to track those shipments in real time, to monitor the status and the location of the goods, so they can make those proactive decisions and work with their customers to understand where there might be a potential delay or where they might need to find a source and alternative product. Understanding the full shipping costs, being able to compare the cost between different carriers and different services to identify cost-saving opportunities. And then performance metrics as well. So once you're kind of bringing in the data in and displaying it in a way that allows people to understand those KPIs like on-time delivery rates, time in transit, that sort of thing, which then allows them to evaluate and improve the overall efficiency of their operation. And again, as I mentioned before, having that data in hand in a way that's consumable does give them the opportunity to negotiate with their carriers, to work and understand and to audit the process and see where there are potential bottlenecks at facilities, for example. And then really what we're seeing, and this isn't unique from an NMB perspective, but the concept of calling it customizable dashboards, but having access in D365 to Power BI and take the data that's in D365 and build that into dashboards and into information that's relevant and useful to different people and different roles within the business, obviously is something that's in high demand. And the benefit that we bring from our perspective is that because the modules are effectively D365 modules, we're embedded in that same solution, then all of the data that we bring to the party that comes in from the carriers that we kind of extend within D365 also then becomes available for that kind of dashboarding and that reporting and that ability to analyze what's going on. So if you can have that so kind of overall comprehensive view of the transportation metrics and drill into the specific data points, then that really does bring something new to the table. And we're finding that that's something that our customers are definitely interested in and are definitely looking for. I guess it was something they were always interested in, but now it's something that's being very specifically called out and that they're looking for and understanding the value that brings to the overall solution rather than just being kind of a nice to have.
Yeah, Chris, I was just thinking about a conversation I had with a client about them adding headcount to their team that specifically are dedicated to how to utilize D365 to its potential within their organization, which I thought that was kind of great, specifically because this isn't a reporting tool, but I've watched this out in the wild that once you have information in Power BI and you have reporting, the next step they're looking at is how do you use things like Power Automate to grab tasks that are repetitive and bring them in and automate those sections and have it be part of that reportable tool that you're using, right? So the more you use D365, and that's the trend I'm seeing, is if they're in, they're all in. They're putting the energy in to bringing in all these different widgets and aspects of how they're looking at their business holistically. So I just wanted to add that.
And, I think back to what we were talking about a bit earlier, that there are some elements of these responsibilities that they can be reactive, right? Things change in the world as we sort of started talking about. And the mix of automation, access and visibility of data and being able to analyze it, I think all plays into being less reactive. I don't know if that's maybe one of the themes here, but being, agile and being ready to adapt, I guess you would say. Maybe that's a more positive way of putting it. But that's, I don't know, looking ahead, that's what I'm thinking about here. Like, We've already talked about how things are changing, some of the factors in the world right now that are impacting that. Are there other trends or other ways that you see supply chain resilience playing a part in sort of adapting ERPs to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all around giving yourself the best way or the best grounding to kind of be, or position to be proactive. So just thinking about how you worded it there, Jason, having access to all of the data and being able to react to it or kind of understand it and proactively react to it rather than kind of having to deal with it on the fly or make kind of like last second decisions based on something that, are things that are unexpected. That's kind of where this makes a big difference. So access to data obviously is essential, whether it's historical data for trends, patterns, that type of thing, and real-time data, obviously for kind of understanding where things are in the moment. And taking those things two together, I did say that we'd have to mention AI at some point. And I think that's really where taking that data, both historical and real time, and then either make decisions based on that or provide prompts or suggestions to users for them to make those decisions is really where this next stage of ERP development is going to come from. Yeah, we already understand that where we're talking about the use of Copilot and different types of AI agents within D365, for example, allow to use that data in real time and reduce the need for manual intervention. And what I would say is when a customer or a client is looking for a solution partner or an ISV to support them in the challenges that we've just kind of talked about there, I think it can be easy to kind of be distracted by the AI kind of noise, but it's really important to understand that the problems that you're looking to solve and understand where the practical application of AI can help with those. AI needs to be leveraged to drive automation and or support the users to help them be more self-sufficient and effective. And things like that, so predictive analytics, demand forecasting, automated decision-making all come into play there. And I would say that going forward, thinking about it just from a kind of that AI perspective and kind of where your businesses are really going to see a benefit, and also see ERPs and D365 in particular sort of, kind of that's the direction it's leading towards. That's kind of really how I see it.
Yeah, Michelle, do you want to add anything in terms of trends that you're watching?
I'm focused all on the skeptic side of trade compliance and AI automation. There's so much out in our space because of how complex it is. And I tend to focus on what Chris was saying, which was the items that actually solve a problem or help what you've got going on. There's lots of options out there. And it's really about taking those tools in and helping users become more confident in their decisions day to day. And I feel like our human in the loop, our compliance people, our smart kids in logistics, all those people are going to be adding in the little bits and pieces to the rest of the customer or the rest of the base within the company, and being able to do sort of more with less. You're going to be able to say, Michelle's not in today, or I can't do this, and now we have to worry. Instead, Michelle's got this program set up where right within D365, we have this, resident expert, so to speak, that brings in external sources, internal sources of data around compliance and makes it usable to everyone based on sort of that source of truth. That's the kind of AI and the kind of automation that I'm interested in, because I don't think there's enough emphasis on those simple things. There's more the flashy things, right? Everyone wants to trace supply chains back to the origin of items and where they're grown. That's all really important work. But we forget to think about how people could be starting to enable themselves to be more resilient throughout their day-to-day when there are shifts and changes. Having a tool built that's based on your truth gives you the opportunity to extend that. So those are the areas I'm super interested in, being in compliance for so long and being a trade professional. Like what I do every day, people think, oh, you can't automate all that. You can't take all that experience and distill it down. But what you can do is make it more accessible to everyone else by sharing those sort of trade patterns and how you do your work in a way that can make it usable by others who may not have those firsthand experiences. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I like that. I really appreciate, I guess I should say, that sort of balanced balanced outlook with hope and a bit of critical eye as well. So thanks for sharing that. Yeah, well, before we wrap up, maybe you could just give, maybe I can start with you, Chris, on this one, is just an update more specifically on what the NMB team is doing these days, where you're going with the NMB Gateway for D365 or other applications that you want our listeners to know about.
There's a couple of things, really. I think just in terms of everything we've talked about, it probably doesn't come as a surprise to anybody listening that, well, a number of the things that we've talked about are as important to businesses, are something that we offer as part of our gateway for D365, whether that's workflow or workforce efficiency, where we're streamlining the workflows, automating processes to make things more efficient and more effective throughout the packing and shipping process. And therefore also allowing businesses to provide a better customer experience that's faster, reliable, more transparent, more proactive. Those are things that are kind of part of our solution set today. And then in terms of some of our other parts, we'll continue looking at ways that we can improve these things. I mentioned the track and trace module. I mentioned the fact that we can provide these management information dashboards, for example. But having maybe sounded a little bit cautious in my previous answer around AI and the use of it, we really see that with ourselves as being in an excellent position to be able to take advantage of the Copilot framework and start to incorporate that AI functionality, those AI agents, into what we provide. And just as I said, in terms of the Power BI dashboards or the Power BI and the reporting and that side of thing, because we're part of the D365 ecosystem, we can work with all of the data from the ERP and our module together, which really provides quite a powerful starting point for all of that. And just to make a long answer a bit shorter, some of the areas that we really see ourselves providing even greater functionality and kind of greater value to our customers is around carrier selection. So not just doing it based on cheapest option that will get to your customer by the right time, but also understanding based on analytics and also kind of real-time information available, kind of selecting the most appropriate carrier service based on service quality, on customer preference, on kind of semi-dynamic business rules, where these can be changed on the fly using just based on somebody's requirements at the time. So rather than having to start developing code or be able to maybe write SQL commands and all of that kind of techie stuff, they're able to express the business rule that they want to use, and that will be interpreted into the right information in the background. Cost optimization is also then comes into play. Understanding kind of how you can better consolidate shipments, how you can maybe use different delivery locations or ship from locations to provide a better service or a reduced cost service by spreading your inventory in a different way. More proactive tracking and visibility of where your goods are when they're out on the road or in the air, and where there are potential disruptions based on things that are happening in real time, or are there some kind of similar sorts of disruptions. Yeah, so there's kind of a number of things that we're doing on our side just to kind of improve those kind of our three kind of key solutions, which are Gateway for Parcel, which is clues in the name, primarily for parcel shipping. Gateway for RPS, which is more on Michelle's side of the fence, which deals with the restricted party screening and the embargoes and sanctioned parties and so on. And then Gateway for TMS, which we've not really talked about too much today, but that's where we integrate with enterprise level TMS partners, so that really moving into a kind of a new area where customers need something where they want to manage full truckloads, ocean, air, rail transportation, have high levels of optimization, do tendering, full invoice reconciliation across all of their transportation landscape. We partner with a couple of Gartner Quadrant businesses on our TMS providers on that side. And those are kind of, again, we have a kind of pretty solid roadmap with those guys as to kind of the new functionality that we're going to keep incorporating into D365 to support that as well. Michelle, I don't know if there's anything that you had on your side.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the main items that I am focusing on outside of all the things that Chris just said that we're doing, which are all amazing, is I like to look at what kind of functionality that we can stand up alongside what we already do that complements those core offerings of NMB, and looking at even optimizing what's there today how would we make it better as things change, especially in the compliance space since it's moving all the time. There's no lack of ability to solve problems for clients. They're going to come up with something new. Hey, this new rule came out and it's causing all these challenges. So my eye is always on what does that look like for the desk user, the compliance person in-house who's trying to navigate that. And, I think we're super well positioned to be that go-to partner in trade compliance for D365. NMB is doing things that I haven't seen out in the market very much at all, even across other ERPs, because again, most people focus on having to buy a large global trade management stack. And you know what? Budgets aren't there for it. So I look at how can we be more accessible to more companies? How can we bake in those things that they're looking for right into and alongside the solutions that we provide for supply chain? So be on the lookout for more of that. I know that's where my mind is, and collaborating to bring some of those ideas into an option for everyone.
Thank you both so much for sort of sharing where you're at, where your Dynamics 365 customers are at, and how you see the landscape evolving. I really appreciate it. I hope we can talk again soon.
No, thanks, Jason. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you again, and hope that we get to catch up again.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Chris and Michelle for joining me. And for more information about NMB Solutions, check out their contact page, nmbsolutions.ca/contact us. We'll put a link in the show notes as well. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, you can send an email, jason@msdynamicsworld.com. For all of our updates, please do follow us on LinkedIn. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.